Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we're going to be going through 85 balance changes with some balancing to Hypercharge in general and a lot of stats that are going to be nerfed and buffed. We've got a lot of buffs to some brawlers and some big nerfs as well. And of course, we've got 6 new Hypercharges, which some of them are completely broken. We're going to be ranking them all the way from the very worst all the way to the very best. Let's hop into it. So we're going to be starting off with the buffs and starting off with Doug, one of the worst brawlers in the game. They're actually removing the damage and healing fall off completely. So he's going to have fixed damage just like Jackie essentially, but he's going to be healing. His damage is going to be fixed at 2,400 and his healing at 1,200. So this is going to help out Doug a lot. So next on the buff list, we have Griff. So he received 3 buffs. The first one being to his main attack damage, going from 520 damage to 560, which is an 8% increase. Then his super got a slight increase in its charge rate, and his piggy bank gadget got an increase in damage from 1,300 to 1,400, which is again an 8% increase. So this is definitely going to help out Griff a lot. Peter has received a buff, and it's to Bruce's HP. It's gone from 8,000 HP to 8,600, which is an 8% increase, which is going to help, but it's not going to push her into the meta. Otis has received 2 buffs. The first one being to his main attack damage, going from 880 damage to 920, which is a 5% increase. And his fat splatter gadget has received a damage buff as well, going from 1,100 to 1,150, so 5% increase in both of these. This is going to help him, but in no way is it going to make him a meta brawler. Ash has received a buff. His rage gained from his basic attack has gone from 130 to 150, so basically that's a 15% increase, which is going to help him ramp up a lot faster. I think it's definitely going to help him out in the meta. So next up we have Ruffs, and he's received 2 buffs. The first one being to his main attack damage. It's gone from 1,120 to 1,200, which is a 7% increase, and his air support gadget has been increased in damage as well, from 1,120 to 1,200, so 7% increase in both of these. This is definitely going to help out Ruffs a lot. So next up we have El Primo. So he's receiving 3 buffs on top of his Hypercharge, which is pretty good as well. So he's definitely going to be meta. The first one is going to be with his main attack damage, going from 720 to 760, which is a 6% increase. His asteroid belt gadget is going from 2,880 damage to 3,040, so another 6% increase. And his El Fuego star power is going from 1,692 damage to 1,786, so 6% increase across the board. As I said, I quite easily seen El Primo being minimum A tier after these changes. So next we have 2 buffs with Gale, and both of them being to his supers. So the first one is with his super damage, going from 840 to 1,000, which is nearly a 20% increase in damage, which actually is substantial. And as a result of that, they've increased his supercharge slightly gained from super. So all in all, his super is going to be a lot more powerful. So next up we have a Barley. He's received 2 buffs, and he definitely needed both of these. So the first one is to his super damage, going from 1,360 to 1,520, which is a 12% increase. And as a result of that, just like Gale, they've increased his supercharge gained from super slightly. So Barley's going to get more supers, and they're going to be more impactful. So next up we have Gene. We're getting 2 buffs, which I'm very happy about, but I don't think they're going to be that impactful. His main attack damage is going from 1,920 to 2,000, which is a 4% increase. That means at maximum range, it's going from 320 to 333. Also, his Vengeful Spirit gadget is going from 1,536 to 1,600 at maximum distance. So 4% buff in both of those. Again, it's not going to help him out too much, but a buff is definitely welcomed. So now we're moving into the final buff, and it's with Penny. She's receiving 2 buffs. The first one to her main attack damage is going from 1,880 to 1,960, which is a 4% increase. And then the Master Blaster star power is going from 1,316 damage to 1,372, so a 4% increase in both of these. I think it's going to help her out, but only a 4% increase. It's not going to push her up too far. So now we're going to be moving on to the nerfs, and the first one is to Hypercharge itself. So Hypercharge duration no longer gets extended by gaining supercharge throughout the Hypercharge. So that basically means that Hypercharge will be 5 seconds forever. You can't extend it with that extra damage. Before, you could probably extend it to like 6, 7, 8 seconds with some brawlers, which was just insane. I'm very, very, very happy about this. Team wipes won't be happening all the time. A great change. But talking about a broken brawler, Fang is receiving 4 nerfs. So the first one is with his fresh kick style power. It no longer charges Hypercharge upon kills, which we kind of knew about. His popcorn Hypercharge no longer gives supercharge. Also, it's been nerfed in damage from a 100% of the super damage down to 50%. And then they've decreased his Hypercharge damage from 20% to 15%. So this is definitely going to hurt Fang, but I still think he's going to be a decent brawler. Pearl is receiving a few nerfs to her Hypercharge and a nerf to her HP. So that's going from 8,400 to 7,800 HP, which is a 7% decrease, which is definitely welcomed. I did recommend that nerf for sure. And she's receiving some changes to her Hypercharge. So she's getting an increase in her Hypercharge damage from 20 to 25%. Her speed is going from 30% to 26%. And her shield is going from 20 to 5%. So some big changes to Pearl. Larry and Laurie are receiving 2 more big nerfs, and I really think that these are going to impact them a lot. Definitely not going to be S tier any longer. So the main attack damage is going from 1,680 to 1,400, which is a 17% decrease in damage. That is massive. I can't see them being too strong anymore, and their range has gone from 24 tiles to 22 tiles, which is an 8% decrease. So I really feel that they're going to fall off after this change. Amber is receiving 2 nerfs. The first one being to her main attack damage is going from 440 damage to 420, which is a 5% decrease. And then the gadget Dancing Flames, it's been too strong, so that's damage is gone from 2,200 to 2,100, so a 5% change there. I think Amber will just be in the middle of the pack now. Next, we have a nerf to Buster again, and it's to his main attack damage going from 2,800 to 2,760, which is a 1% decrease, which is quite funny, to be honest. It's probably the smallest nerf I've ever seen, but I think the meta around him probably will impact him more than this nerf itself. So the next nerf is with Cordelius. So they've disabled the jump gadget in the Shadow Realm. Before, you could just jump whenever you're in the Shadow Realm. Now you can't do that, so that's definitely a big nerf to Cordelius. So now we kind of had a lot of changes with Hypercharge, and a lot of his stats are getting changed. Some of them buffed, some of them nerfed. And I'm actually happy about this, because that was a big problem with Hypercharge, how the stat increases just led to such overwhelming interactions. So I'm really thankful for Brawl Stars to listening to me with the community feedback. I love it. It's not going to be as toxic. So let's go through these brawlers in. So the first one is going to be with Colette. Her Hypercharge speed is going from 30% to 26%, and her shield is going from 15 to 5%. Maisie, her Hypercharge speed is going from 30% to 26%, and then shield 15% to 5%. And the same goes for Lou as well. 30% speed to 26% speed, and down to 15% shield from 5%. The next one, we have some nerfs to Colt. He's receiving 4 nerfs to his Hypercharge. So the first one's going to be to his Hypercharge multiplier. So right now it's 40%, so that's 2.5 supers. It's been nerfed to 35%, which is actually technically 3 supers it's going to take to get his Hypercharge, which is a big nerf for me. The next one is with his damage. It's going from 30% to 25%. His speed is going from 30 to 26%, and his shield is going from 10 to 5%. So a lot of nerfs to Colt's Hypercharge. So next we have Brawl. He's receiving 3 nerfs all to his Hypercharge. Again, his multiplier has gone from 40 to 35%, so it take roughly 3 supers to get his Hypercharge. It's getting a decrease in damage from 10 to 5%, and his shield is going from 30 to 25%. So not the biggest changes, but still impactful. So next we have Dynamite. His Hypercharge multiplier is going from 40% to 30%, so an even bigger nerf. It will take more than 3 supers to get his Hypercharge, which is huge. And then his Hypercharge damage is going from 30 to 25%, and his shield 15 to 5%. This is definitely going to hurt Dynamite a lot. Now we have some changes. We have 5 to Charlie overall, and the first one is going to be the last change outside of Hypercharge, which is going to be the fact that her super projectile speed has gone from 4,200 to 3,300. So basically that's a 20% nerf, which basically means it's just going to be a lot harder to hit your super at max range. You're not going to be able to auto aim it as efficiently as well. You feel the change 100% as soon as you try out Charlie. Also, her Hypercharge rate has increased from 40% to 60%, so she'll get Hypercharge a lot faster now. Her damage from Hypercharge has gone from 30 to 25%, her speed has gone from 30 to 26%, and her shield has gone from 10 to 5%. So next we have 5 changes to Edgar, the first one being to his Let's Fly gadget. It no longer charges his Hypercharge, and as a result of that, they've reverted his Hypercharge nerf from 25% to 40%, so it'll take 2.5 supers to get his Hypercharge. The next is an increase to his Hypercharge speed going from 20 to 24%, a decrease in his damage from 25 to 15%, and a decrease in his shield to 25 to 15%. So next we have 3 changes to Shelly. The first one being to her Hypercharge multiplier. It's going from 40% to 30%. So effectively, she's going to take 3 plus supers to get her Hypercharge. She's going to decrease in her Hypercharge damage from 25 to 5%, and an increase in her shield from 15% to 25%. Spike is receiving 4 changes. The first one to his Hypercharge multiplier. It's going from 40% to 35%. So it'll effectively take 3 supers to get his Hypercharge. The next is with his damage, and it's going from 20 to 25%. His speed is being nerfed from 30 to 26, and his shield is being nerfed from 20% to 5%. So next we have 4 changes to Jessie. The first one being to her Hypercharge multiplier. It's going from 40% to 60%. So it's going to take less than 2 supers to get her Hypercharge, which is really good. It took forever to get it. And the next one is going to be with her Hypercharge damage 20% to 25%, which is a buff. Her speed is going from 30% to 26%, a 4% nerf, and the shield is going from 20% to 5%. So some good changes to Jessie. Nico is receiving 2 small changes. His Hypercharge speed is being increased from 20 to 24%, and his shield has been decreased to 25 to 5%. Pro is receiving 4 changes. His Hypercharge multiplier is going from 40% to 60%. So a good change just like Jessie. Both of these brawlers took way too long to get their Hypercharge. The next is with his Hypercharge damage going from 30% to 25%. His speed is being increased from 20 to 24%, and his shield is being decreased from 25 to 5%. Jackie is receiving 2 changes. The first one to her Hypercharge damage going from 25% to 5%, and her shield is being increased from 15% to 25%. Rosa is receiving 2 changes. The first to her Hypercharge damage going from 20% to 5%, and her speed is being increased from 20% to 25%. And lastly, with all the balance changes, we have Leon. So his Hypercharge speed is being increased from 20% to 24%, and the shield has been decreased from 25% to 5%. So I'll go more in depth on my second channel about these, but this is just all the changes right now. So now we're going to be ranking all 6 new Hypercharges from the very worst all the way up to the very best. Starting off at number 6 with Belle. Her Hypercharge is called Magnetic. All it does is that it homes onto the opponent, and no matter what, you pretty much hit it every single time, which is good. But at the same time, they've not added any other effects like a slow or just anything cooler than this. I think that's probably the worst Hypercharge that Belle probably could have got. I mean, I will be harsh on this one, but I'm a Belle main, and I would have really liked a better Hypercharge. It also takes 2 supers, 10 shots to get, so at least you get it fast. But for me, I would have liked something a little bit different. It's just not worth the 5,000 coin investment. So next up at number 5, we have Sprout's Hypercharge called Thorns. So whenever Sprout uses his super on an opponent, it will deal 500 damage to them. So again, a really lackluster Hypercharge. I'd have liked something a lot different. Most of the time with Sprout anyways, you're going to avoid his walls unless you really can't, but at the same time you have to be literally on top of the super to get damage dealt to you, and it's still only 500. So I don't really like this Hypercharge. The good thing about it though, you can use your gadget to replace the other Hypercharge wall and then get a new one. And you can also, if you've not got a super available when you have your Hypercharge, you can just pop your gadget again and get a Hypercharge super for free. So that's a good thing about Sprout, and it only takes 2 supers to get, or 10 hits. So that's okay, but again, the Hypercharge itself isn't that great. So next up, as the 4th best Hypercharge coming out with the update, we have Cordelius's Hypercharge called Complete Darkness. So whenever Cordelius uses Hypercharge super onto someone, it will slow them down for the whole duration, which I think is really strong. It basically means you're going to get a guaranteed kill every single time, but a big downside to this is that it takes more than 3 supers to get this Hypercharge super. And with Cordelius, it's actually pretty hard to cycle through them, because of course, if you use a super on an opponent, you can't actually gain any of your supercharge back whilst inside of the Shadow Realm. So I think this is going to be a big underlying issue, and his Hypercharge won't actually be as strong because you won't get it as frequently, but still, every single time you use it, as I said, it'll be a free kill, so it's still pretty strong. So next up is the 3rd best new Hypercharge in the game. We have BB's Hypercharge called Out of Bounds. So whenever BB's Hypercharge bubble hits an opponent, it will split off into two. It's only that first bubble though, it won't like infinitely split off. It also splits off on the high safe, but because of the angle it splits off at, it's never going to deal more damage to the safe again. You know, people were worrying about pit stop, for example, but I still think this is going to be a really underrated Hypercharge, especially if you get cycling maybe a few supers. You can deal a lot of damage around the map. So for me, I like this one, it's really fun. So next up is the second best new Hypercharge in the game. We went with Primo's Hypercharge called Gravity Leap. So what this Hypercharge does, it actually increases Primo's kind of jump radius, so you're going to be able to hit opponents easier. Also, it kind of leaps them in the air for an extended time and then pulls them closer to him, just like Jackie's super. The reason why this is so good is because by the time they've kind of landed close to you, if you're using this Supercharge Epic gear, you're able to cycle the supers so fast to get a couple of Hypercharge supers in a row and just absolutely delete the opponent. The big downside to this though, it takes over 3 supers to get this Hypercharge super, so it will take a long while, but I can really see some nasty team wipes with this Hypercharge. So now moving into the best Hypercharge literally in the entire game when this drops. It is Buzz's Hypercharge called Buzzwatch. So I just knew for a fact that this Hypercharge was going to be broken, and boy was I right, this is completely broken. Honestly, one of the best ones I've ever seen. So what this Hypercharge does is it throws out a torpedo literally multiple times in a row. You're never out of a super, and you have a stun every single time. So the reason why this is toxic is because you'll just stun lock people. So people are saying, well, there might be some counterplay to it. It's like zero counterplay to it. It's just absolutely broken. There's just nothing more frustrating than being stun locked. You rewind back to the Gale meta years ago. It's just so frustrating. You're not able to do anything. At least a bit of a benefit is that Buzz kind of has to stop his stun to get a few attacks off, but if you're close to 3 people and you're just stun locking, then your teammates are going to be able to clean up anyways. I think this is completely broken, and hopefully it gets nerfed before it's into the game, or else he's going to be the best brawler easily. And finally, we have the map pool changes, so I'm going to whiz through these super quickly, but you guys like to see it. So with Showdown, there's a bunch of changes, I think, and the only new map is Marksman's Paradise. I think with Trophy Escape, these are going to be the free maps for it. Again, I'm not too sure if any of these have been in Showdown before. With Heist, they're all maps that we're familiar with. With Bounty, again, maps that we're familiar with. With Brawl, I think there's one new map, which is called Goalkeeper's Dream, which has actually been added into competitive, which I'm really unsure about, considering no one's actually tested it out. With, again, Hot Zone, you should be familiar with all of these maps. With Knockout, again, we're familiar with all of these maps, except for New Horizons, which, again, I think it might be a competitive map. Basket Brawl, again, I'm not too sure whether these maps have been seen before, but I'll just go through them really quickly so you guys can see them. And then we lastly have Wipeout, which again, we're pretty much familiar with all of these. And lastly, we have the maps for the ranked game mode, which I think is pretty much identical to the map pool for Brawl Stars World Championship. I've not cross-referenced it, but I think it is just by first glance. So with Gem Grab, we have Minecart Madness, we have Double Swoosh, and Rustic Arcade. Again, a map I've never seen in competitive, and I don't think it's going to perform that greatly, but we'll have to try it out. And then next we have Heist. So the maps for Heist are going to be Safe Zone, Bridge Too Far, and Pit Stop. With Bounty, it's going to be XL, Hideout, and Shooting Star. Brawl is going to be Center Stage, Pinball Dreams, and Goalkeeper's Dream. Again, a map that's never been out in the game, which is already in ranked and competitive, which is pretty scary. And then with Hot Zone, we have Dueling Beetles, Ring of Fire, and Split. And then lastly for Knockout, we have Bells Rock, Out in the Open, and New Horizons. So again, another new map which hasn't been tested in competitive, so few really weird decisions. But anyways, this is gonna be it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one. A lot to digest. As I said, on the second channel, I'll give you guys more thoughts on the balance changes, who I think is going to be meta and whatever else. Make sure to subscribe to the second channel. But that's going to be it. Hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe here, and I'll see you guys next time.